There's no argument coming from anyone that the car radio remains the strongest connection between broadcasters and their potential audience. And the fact that many AM signals are now devoting themselves to being full-time information stations, including weather and traffic, is no mistake. One of the top researchers in the world is Vision Critical's Jeff Vidler, who has been a friend of CMW since its inception. We welcome him here today to deliver some insight on this growing trend and other thoughts. Please welcome Jeff Vidler.
So being with CMW since its inception is another way of saying old. Is that right, Greg? It would seem like that to me. Anyhow, really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of research that we've done over the past little while. And something that we're really finding in researchers is that the importance or the opportunity presented by commuters, which we really see as radio's growing and engaged audience. As radio continues to evolve, as times change, there's an opportunity there for radio, and we'll show you some of the reasons why we feel that way. Start, first of all, really what we're hoping to do here, and maybe just in the next 50 minutes or so, is shed a little bit of light on what is really in effect that kind of dark side of the moon when it comes to radio listening. PPM doesn't break out, as you know, doesn't break out in-car listening from at-work listening. There's no split there at all. We used to have that kind of split, but that was with diaries. And what diaries don't show us, and this has actually been proven by PPM, is it doesn't show us the kind of incidental tuning occasions that occur in the car. One of the things that those who've looked really deep into PPM numbers have noticed, and actually noticed at the very beginning, is that as much as PPM numbers showed somewhat lower tuning overall for radio than diaries, out-of-home tuning on evenings and weekends was much higher in PPM than it was in the diary. And there's really only one logical explanation for that. That's not workplace listening, that's in-car listening that wasn't being picked up in the diary. A week later, think of it, when you're filling out a diary, are you going to remember about every trip to the grocery store, every trip to pick up your kids at soccer, and what you were listening to? You're not going to remember that. You aren't going to remember those incidental trips in the car that PPM is actually showing kind of inside, on the other side of the moon, if you like, is actually happening. That there, in fact, is the out-of-home tuning that we got from diaries, which we consider to be all workplace tuning, is, if you look at those numbers closely, in fact, a lot of that is in-car tuning. And that's what our research shows as well. What we'll share with you today is this results of two different studies that we've done over the past couple of years. One was done this fall. It's called Radio Engagement in Canada. We interviewed 2,000 plus Canadians, age 12 plus. And also Radio on the Move. I'll share with you some of the results of that. This is a study that we started, a tracking study we started in December of 2010, when all of the talk about infotainment systems and all the other kinds of streaming audio and things that would become available in the cars started. We thought we would start with a baseline and understanding exactly what was happening in the car, what is the impact of the new audio options in terms of the car. So we started tracking that since December 2010. We've done 4 waves of research on that since. We'll share some of the results from that with you as well. Both of these studies were conducted using Vision Critical, our Sparq survey platform, with a representative sample selected from the Angus Reid Forum. Angus Reid Forum is our national online research panel, 150,000 Canadians. It's the sample source that we've used when we do our political polling. In fact, 20 of the last 21 federal and provincial elections, we've been as close or closer than any telephone poll in predicting the results of that election using the Angus Reid Forum. So what you're looking at here is a representative sample of Canadians through the Angus Reid Forum and the data we'll give you today. So to start with, how much tuning does go in the car? The average Canadian adult says that in-car tuning accounts for more than half of the time they spend with radio. 51% of the time they spend with radio is spent in the car, 33% at home, 13% at work, and then 4% elsewhere. And how does radio do in the car relative to the other audio sources that are there? This is from the most recent wave of the Radio on the Move study. That radio still dominates in the car in reach, This is asking people who are Canadian drivers and passengers, that's the sample source that we use for radio in the move, people who say they've been in a private vehicle sometime in the past week, which is about 88% of the Canadian population. 72% of them said that in the previous 24 hours, they listened to AM/FM radio in the car. When you take personal music, CDs, iPods, put all of that together, that only comes to 26% who said they listened to some kind of personal music in the car. Sirius XM satellite radio, 10%, podcast, 2%. Streamed audio, again, this might be a little bit different in the States where streaming is a few steps ahead, or many steps ahead of Canada. Only 2% said that they had done that at all in the previous 24 hours, and only 1% had listened to audiobooks. And you look at that in terms of share, and it's actually very much the same story. 2/3 of all the audio consumption in the car goes to AM/FM radio. About 25% to personal music, whether that be CDs, iPods. We even actually allow people to answer cassettes in there too, and that's all part of that. There are a very small percentage of people who still have the cassettes in their car. But again, radio still dominates at this point. Obviously, one of the reasons we're tracking it is we're looking to see how this might change over time. To note that in the first 4 waves of tracking since December 2010, we've seen virtually no movement in any of those numbers. 1 or 2% each time, but really within the margin of error each time. A really important subset of the in-car listening, or in-car listeners, are those who commute to work or school by private vehicle. More than half of all online adult Canadians say that they commute to work or school by car or truck at some point in a typical week. And the time that they're spending, that 51% of the population are spending commuting, is going up. From our study, 25% said compared to 2 years ago, they're now spending more time in their daily commute. Only 14% saying they're spending less time in their daily commute. That's a difference of 11% overall. And this is actually backed up by Statistics Canada numbers as well. Statistics Canada shows that there's been a very steady trend since the early 1990s. The commute time that Canadians are facing is going up and up and up. And that difference in commute time, when you look at the major centers, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, that is increasing even more. So this is an increasing or a growing opportunity for radio in terms of the time that people are spending commuting and the amount of AM/FM radio consumption there is in the car. So if we want to break that down even more and look at those people who commute and spend at least an hour a day to get to and from work or school, we get to see a real look at sort of the heavy commuter, that really particular target that at this point, at the very least, is still very much a captive and engaged audience for radio. A total of 27% of those who commute to work or school say that their commute takes them at least an hour a day when they combine going to work and coming back. Now you look at this in terms of Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, that figure gets closer to 40%. As you know, anybody who lives in a major center, it obviously takes longer to get to work. It's about 45% in fact in Toronto. And this is an attractive target. This is a reason why this particular group of heavy commuters are important to radio. From a sales standpoint, they help to deliver a difficult to reach, attractive target. Indexing 117 for males, indexing high for 25, 54-year-olds, very high for household incomes of over 100,000 affluent consumers, college, university educated, smartphone users, kids in the household, very attractive advertiser target. These heavy commuters who spend a lot of time in their car every day. That up to 40% in some major markets of the commuters who do that. And they are, from a programming standpoint, big radio listeners. The people who commute by car at least an hour a day listen to 3.7 hours a day of radio in a typical weekday compared to just 2.4 hours a day for those who don't commute by car. It's about 50%, or actually a little bit more than 50% higher than those who don't commute by car. And this is something that's particularly interesting, and I think it has implications on 2 levels, on both the programming side and on the advertising side, is that the commuters, these people who spend that much time in the car each day, are engaged listeners. 58% of them say that they usually or always pay close attention to the radio when they're in the car. That's a lot higher than people who aren't heavy commuters. In fact, that figure is about 35% for the lighter commuters. More listening done in the background by people who don't spend that amount of time commuting. That figure of 58% usually are always paying close attention to radio in the car among those commuters is on the same kind of level when you ask people when they watch television at home. You ask the same question and give the same scale. So you're really talking about, this is not a background listener, this is an engaged listener who's spending a lot of time in the car and making a connection to the radio station. So how do you engage them? I mean, I think that you could probably have a large session in itself of how do you engage these commuters, this attractive target, this growing target. Certainly one of those ways is traffic reports. This comes from the Radio on the Move study. In the past 24 hours, and this was not just of commuters, this is of all in-car listeners, people who were either, or all all drivers and passengers in cars, asked in the past 24 hours, if they had listened to AM/FM radio in the past 24 hours, we asked them whether they made a point of listening to traffic information in the vehicle. 40% said they did. 26% said they actually sought out information on traffic and road conditions before they got in the car. And 15% said in the past 24 hours they'd actually switched stations specifically to hear a traffic report. So again, I mean, one of the measures, if you like, of engagement of this particular audience, and one of the things that obviously makes them attractive and a type of programming that is definitely part of that mix to reach this engaged, growing audience. So sort of wrap it all up in terms of what all of this means, at least what all of it means to us. From a programming standpoint, reaching and engaging the in-car listeners really offers an opportunity for radio to reassert its relevance by redefining its role for changing times. The changing times are longer commute times. The fact that the at-work listener, the at-home listener, has a lot more options available to them at this point. The in-car listener really doesn't have that many that they're actively using. We saw that personal music is part of that. Certainly there will be things in the future, but at this point there's not. There was a huge revolution. I mean, radio has morphed and evolved over the years in many different ways because of technology, because of demographics. When TV came on, it changed its programming to fill a different kind of role. When working women, or when women came into the workplace in the 70s and 80s, FM, AC radio, listen at work radio came into play, and that extended radio listening hours. The housewife listening changed, which was a very foreground type of listening, changed to a kind of background listen at work listening, which delivered big numbers. Well, those numbers are actually sort of falling back now over time. This may be the opportunity for radio, its exclusive opportunity, at least in the short run. And what's important for this, of course, is that it will help, by engaging this audience, this commuting audience, it will help broadcast radio. And by the way, that's the definition I'm using here. If we go back to the session this morning in terms of what are the definitions of radio that we're working with, I'm talking here about broadcast radio. Obviously, radio can live on other platforms as well. But if you're looking at broadcast radio, protecting your license, one way to protect yourself against that uncertain future is if you don't engage this audience and other things come into the dashboard, then you lose that chance to reach them. But if you take that opportunity now while you have the head start to engage that audience, then you have a chance to make that broadcast license and preserve its value going forward. And finally, on a very kind of short-term tactical basis, because of what we now know about PPM and what we can see in PPM, which is that in-car listening, is that sort of dark side of the moon that you can't see but is clearly there in terms of PPM listening. By focusing on those commuters, on the in-car listeners, you have a chance to win in PPM. And there's obviously advantages from the sales side as well. In-car listener provides the advertiser with that attractive, sometimes difficult to reach target, that really busy male, 25, 54, kids in the household, people that are difficult to reach through other media at other times, you can reach them in the daily commute. And also, it gives advertisers an opportunity to really build new partnerships with advertisers who are not looking for exposure these days. They aren't looking for just eyeballs, they're looking for engagement. And this is an engaged radio audience. This is a radio audience that's more engaged than the average radio audience, as engaged as a TV viewer, for example. So there you go. That's just a glimpse of the dark side of the moon, if you like, radio tuning from the commuter standpoint, from the in-car listening side. I want to thank you for your attention. Are we running out of time, or do we have a moment or two for questions? Greg? Oh, I have 1 minute and 3 seconds left. We have time for one question, then, I would say. Any questions? Well, then, thank you very much.